Well, the answer is I listen to the scientists. A convention having tens of thousands of people in one arena is very different than having people walk into a polling booth with accurate spacing to 6 to 10 feet apart, one at a time, going in and have machines scrubbed down. But I do think there are going to be a lot more. I think you could hold the election as well, dealing with mail-in ballots and same-day registration. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done.
So what you just heard there was Joe Biden lying to the American people, lying to the media when he said that in-person voting for today's Wisconsin Democratic primary was something that you could do safely, that you could social distance while voting and not have those two things conflict, which is 100% false. 100% false. Since Joe Biden said that, since Joe Biden put American lives at risk, there was an attempt by the Wisconsin governor to postpone the primary, but that was blocked by a Republican-dominated Supreme Court in Wisconsin and at the national level. A 5-4 vote of the U.S. Supreme Court basically forced this primary to go ahead. So in essence, despite the fact that Bernie Sanders and that most of the Democratic forces on the ground in Wisconsin did not want this primary to go ahead as scheduled today because it put lives at risk, Joe Biden, in an alliance with Republicans, judicial Republicans and elected Republicans, got this primary to go forward. And much as I noted in a previous video when Biden told this lie, the first time, I suggested that this was all about Biden's utter desperation to defeat Bernie Sanders now because Biden knows that he's a weak candidate. And he knows that the longer this primary goes, the more and more people will see him and his weaknesses, his policy weaknesses and his personal weaknesses on everything from the fact that he continues to defend employer-linked insurance models, even as 30% of people might find themselves employed, to the fact that he's clearly demonstrating dementia and cognitive decline. And so when you combine all of that, Biden's like, I need to get every last primary under my belt as soon as I can because it locks the delegates in. And if primaries keep getting postponed into late May or early June or what have you, then at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders has that much more of a chance of catching up. It might be slim for Bernie to catch up under any circumstances, but delaying the vote gives Bernie that extra ray of sunshine, that little crack in the armor to slip through that he might not have if we hold the vote. And so in essence, Joe Biden is putting people's lives below his electoral conquest, before his desire to be the nominee and be the president. They matter less to him than his own vanity, than his own ambition. That's Joe Biden. Again, rank and file Wisconsin Democrats understand that this is absurd. People on the ground, voters on the ground, understand that this is absurd, that this shouldn't be happening, that it could have been postponed and made a fully mail-in voting day. That's what should and could have been done if not blocked by the Wisconsin and National Supreme Court and not tacitly endorsed by Joe Biden. Again, we have to be clear, Biden wasn't the one making the decision here. It wasn't as if Bernie agreed to postpone and Biden didn't and therefore they couldn't. This was ultimately up to Supreme Courts, but I'm sure that having Biden basically endorse the election today didn't hurt the arguments made by some of these courts because they could say, look, there are some Democrats like Joe Biden that want this primary to go forward, who think that we can balance public safety and holding this vote on this particular day, despite the fact that social distancing will be very difficult. So, Joe Biden doesn't care how he gets his delegates. He doesn't care if this election will be seen as grossly illegitimate by the vast majority of Democratic voters. Those will still be his delegates, and he'll proudly take them to the convention. As I noted in my previous video on this subject, something very similar happened during a previous primary window. On the day where Illinois, Arizona, and Florida voted, there were 5 other states that were supposed to vote but chose to postpone. And Biden, throughout that whole process, was all about having as many states go on that day as possible. saying that we never canceled elections during wars, why would we cancel one now? And that the American people deserve to have their voices heard on this day. And Biden's surrogates had the gall to suggest that when Bernie Sanders and his supporters were talking about the need to protect public health and postpone these elections so that they could be done by mail at a later date, they were accused of causing voter suppression. They were accused of turning people away from the polls, of suggesting people don't go and vote. Because at the end of the day, it was a strategy by Bernie to delegitimize the primaries. It was absurd. What Bernie Sanders was doing was telling his own people, the people he needs to vote for him to win this election, to put their health and safety and human dignity first. And Biden was doing the opposite, telling everybody to put their little X on a ballot for Biden ahead of their own lives, the lives of their children, the lives of their loved ones, the lives of their elderly parents, for instance. That's what Joe Biden was doing. And that's what he was also doing when he was talking about this Wisconsin primary. That's not leadership. Joe Biden being that scared that Bernie Sanders could win this primary, and so he's willing to put lives at risk to have this vote, is not a sign of leadership. It's a sign of cowardice, and it's a sign of selfishness. And it's a good test of character in this moment to ask yourself, who is putting what priorities first at this moment? Bernie Sanders isn't telling his own supporters to go out and vote today. Bernie has actually canceled traditional get out the vote strategies. He's not doing the things you would normally do in a typical election, knocking on doors, driving people to the polls, doing all those sorts of things, because it's not safe. It's not safe to do, and Bernie said he wasn't going to do that weeks ago. Bernie Sanders has basically transformed his campaign into raising issues of awareness around this crisis and ensuring that all of his supporters and indeed all voters are safe. Joe Biden has done the opposite. It's still about winning delegates for Joe Biden, even if those delegates are paid for in lives. Ask yourselves this. When it comes to a man that will choose a few delegates in Wisconsin over people, over their basic safety, what does that tell you of the sorts of decisions that man will make if and when he becomes president? And then look at Bernie Sanders and ask yourselves, what does it say about a man that will put aside his dream, his ambition of being president, something that he's been working for since 2015, aside for the lives of people he has never met? What kind of decision will that man make when the chips are down as president? And I can tell you this, I trust Bernie Sanders to make the right decision for regular people before and as president, and I certainly don't trust Joe Biden to do the same.